So Gloria, basically everyone here was aware of what was going on with the Hong Kong protests and the Hong Kong demonstrations, but only a handful of people were aware of what was going on in Chile at the same time. So I wanted to, because this has always struck me as an important contrast from a North American perspective, that in Chile, there were protests, riots in the street. The government that had recently been elected was kind of a center-right, essentially liberal organization, and Chile is very prosperous. But student protests and other protests started happening in the streets. And I don't want to get too conspiratorial here, but they seemed rather targeted, where if you are protesting the current government, what they were doing, you'll go and protest the government buildings. What they were doing is going into the major grocery stores and destroying the grocery stores and going into the subway systems on which most of the working people come into the city and destroying the subway stations and so forth. So the food network and the transportation network was relatively destroyed. Now, tell me if I'm wrong, but this seems like it's a left-wing organization that is incredibly violent against what's essentially a liberal, conservative government in place. And they're, in effect, trying to stir the people up to mount a coup, although it seems like if you're destroying people's grocery stores, they're not going to be on your side, but there's an interesting strategy. And Hong Kong is almost the exact opposite of that, because there very clearly you have a much more authoritarian government, the 800-pound gorilla of politics that is Beijing, and then tiny Hong Kong, and Beijing is trying to bring Hong Kong more into the authoritarian gambit, and the Hong Kongers are much more liberal, market-friendly, cosmopolitan, and they are protesting, and they're going out into the streets, but I think it was several months of protesting before there was any violence from the protesters at all. It was actually peaceful civil protest until certain provocations happened. So do you have thoughts about the contrast between those two concurrent sets of demonstrations going on?
Well, first of all, it is not the same complaining of a government wanting more of that government subsidizing your life, which is the case of Chile, than complaining about a dictatorship that is taking away your three individual rights, life, liberty, and private property, which I think is the case of Hong Kong. And this has been the irony always in Latin America, people complaining of a corrupt government at the same time that they ask more of that government subsidizing their lives. And people don't seem to understand that absolute power comes into absolute corruption. And therefore, if they are complaining about corruption, that what they should be asking for is a more limited government, not more of that government controlling their lives, especially in the economic realm. As far as Chile goes, actually, they try to have their own socialism of the 21st century experiment with Michelle Bachelet, and democratically, she was, after two periods, kicked out of office, and the Chileans voted again for Jose Piñera. Jose Piñera, like all the right wing in Latin America, and this is why I also into putting in place the free market ideas.
Sorry, Gloria, can you just go back to Jose?
Oh, sorry.
Jose Piñera?
Yeah, the Chileans voted for Jose Piñera back in office, but unfortunately, when the right wing it's voted in Latin America, they are not courageous enough or are not committed enough into free market public policy. So they try to adjust into like breaking from some of the socialism, but still they have a lot of statism. That's what happened also with Mauricio Macri in Argentina. So because they don't do enough of shock therapy, then people want to go back to whatever they had before. And in the case of Chile, for decades now, the communist youth had been getting more and more importance, and they were trying to take Chile out of the Chicago Boys system, selling Cuba as the model to follow. So this was something that was happening in the universities, in the schools, in different parts of society. But businessmen were more concerned in making money and not in making the cultural revolution. So it is known that because Venezuela has no more money left, Colombia, they were not successful into doing the peace agreements that they wanted for FARC to become, well, they still did it, but not with the public support. Socialism of the 21st century always needs a country with resources. My guess is that without Venezuela, Bolivia being kicked out, Evo Morales, and having no other alternatives, Chile was one of the attractive offers as to go. And there were already young people seduced by socialism because, as I was telling you, the curious things that happen is the richer the country, the easiest it is for the new generations to forget that things need to be worked and need to be produced in order to exist. So it is easier, at least in the case of Latin America, for what I've seen and what I have researched for my books, How to Talk to a Progressive, How to Talk to a Conservative, it is easier for communism to be a disease of the rich than it is to be a disease of the poor.
Good. You mentioned left and right a few times along the way, and one of my dissatisfactions with journalistic labeling is precisely the left and right. And one of the issues is that they mean different things in different parts of the world. So, North American context, the dominant American culture, right means Republicans by and large, left means Democrats, right, by and large. But the Republicans and Democrats tend to agree on a huge swath of things, and then it's only at the extremes. Like so, Donald. I don't want to get too hung up on Donald Trump, right? But Donald Trump was a Democrat for most of his political career, and then switched over to being a Republican for a while. And I don't know that that meant a great ideological change on his part. But it is true that in North America, the right has been more favorable to free markets and free trade and so on.